The most powerful person in any room is rarely the one talking. Think about that for a moment. We live in a world that rewards noise, that celebrates those who speak the loudest, argue the hardest, and fill every silence with words. We are taught that visibility equals power, that if you are not speaking, you are losing. But Sun Tzu knew something that most people will go their entire lives without understanding. He knew that silence is not the absence of power. Silence is the power. And the men and women who have mastered this one invisible weapon, they don't just win arguments, they win wars. They win negotiations. They win entire rooms without saying a single word. The terrifying part? You would never see it coming, because that is precisely the point. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear will permanently change the way you move through the world. Sun Tzu was not a philosopher who sat in temples writing poetry about peace. He was a general, a strategist, a man who understood that the battlefield is not just made of swords and soldiers, it is made of information, perception, and psychological dominance. He wrote The Art of War approximately 2,500 years ago, 31 pages, 13 chapters, and yet military academies, Fortune 500 executives, and intelligence agencies still study it today, because human nature has not changed. The battles have simply moved from open fields to boardrooms, courtrooms, and living rooms. Most people who read Sun Tzu focus on his lessons about warfare, about strategy, about knowing your enemy. But there is one weapon woven through every single chapter of The Art of War that almost nobody talks about. It has no blade, it makes no sound, it leaves no trace, and Sun Tzu used it more consistently than any army, any tactic, any deception. That weapon is silence. In this video, we are going to break down 7 of Sun Tzu's most dangerous lessons about silence, what it really means, how it works, and how you can use it to become someone that others cannot read, cannot manipulate, and cannot defeat. And I want you to stay until the very last lesson, because the 7th one is the one that changes everything. It is the reason why the most dangerous people you will ever meet, say the least. Lesson 1. Silence is the ultimate form of information control. Sun Tzu wrote, "Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night." Read that again slowly. Dark and impenetrable as night. He is not talking about your army. He is not talking about your weapons. He is talking about your mind, and specifically what you allow others to see inside it. Here is something most people fundamentally misunderstand about power. They believe that sharing information builds connection, that being open and transparent makes people trust you, that explaining your thinking makes you appear intelligent and capable, and sometimes, in very specific contexts, that is true. But Sun Tzu understood something darker, something more fundamental. Every piece of information you give to another person is a weapon they can use against you. Every time you explain your plan, you give your opponent time to counter it. Every time you reveal your emotions, you hand someone a map to manipulate you. Every time you speak before you have thought, you show your enemy exactly where you're standing. Information is the currency of war, and silence is how you protect your treasury. Think about the greatest negotiators in history, the ones who walked away with everything. What did they have in common? They spoke less than the other side. They asked questions and then went quiet. They let the silence do the work because silence creates discomfort, and discomfort makes people talk, and people who talk too much reveal exactly what they want and exactly what they fear. Sun Tzu built entire military campaigns around this principle. He would move his army without announcing his destination. He would make his soldiers look weak when they were strong. He would create confusion, not by lying, but simply by saying nothing. Your enemy cannot counter a move he does not know you are making. There is a man, you may have heard of him, a negotiator for a major investment firm. He had one rule before every meeting. Whoever speaks first after an offer is made loses. He would make his offer, and then he would sit in complete silence. No matter how uncomfortable it became, no matter how long it lasted, he would wait. And 9 times out of 10, the other side would break the silence. And in breaking it, they would either accept his terms or reveal exactly how desperate they were. He never learned this from a business school. He learned it from the art of war. Application. This week, in your next important conversation, make one deliberate choice. After you say what you need to say, stop. Do not fill the silence. Do not soften your position with extra words. Let the silence land. Watch what happens to the other person. Watch how quickly they start talking. Watch what they reveal. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is pressure, invisible, weightless, and absolutely ruthless. But here is what nobody tells you about this lesson. Silence alone is not enough, because there is a specific kind of silence that Sun Tzu used, one that goes far beyond simply not talking, and we will get to that. But first, the second lesson, because this one is even more unsettling. Sun Tzu wrote, "Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." Without fighting. This is the principle that separates a general from a warrior. A warrior fights. A general makes his enemy not want to fight, and the most effective way to do that has nothing to do with force. It has everything to do with what you don't say. Consider this. Which is more terrifying? A man who screams threats at you, or a man who looks at you calmly and says nothing at all? The screaming man is predictable. You know what he wants. You know his emotional state. You can manage him. You can reason with him. You can wait him out. But the silent man, you have no idea what he is capable of. You cannot read him. You cannot predict him. And in that uncertainty, your own mind becomes your worst enemy. You start imagining possibilities. You start assuming the worst. You become paralyzed not by what he has done, but by what he might do. Sun Tzu called this controlling the psychological terrain before the battle even begins. History is full of examples. In 512 BC, Sun Tzu himself was commissioned by King Helu of Wu. To prove his methods, he was given 180 palace concubines and asked to turn them into soldiers. When they laughed at his commands, he did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply stated the consequence once, and then he carried it out without hesitation or emotion. 2 of the king's favorite concubines were executed as an example. The rest of the women became perfect soldiers. He never raised his voice. He never repeated himself. He simply made clear, through his actions, not his words, that he was not someone who made empty gestures. Lesson 2. The unspoken threat is more powerful than any warning. That is the unspoken threat, not a warning, not a promise, a demonstration that you mean exactly what you say, delivered with total silence and total control. In your own life, this looks like this. Stop explaining your boundaries. Stop warning people multiple times. Stop saying, if you do that again, I will, and then doing nothing. The power is not in the threat. The power is in the track record of your silence followed by your action. People who talk about what they will do rarely do it. People who say nothing and then act are the ones that others learn to respect and fear. Open loop. But there is a darker side to this lesson that Sun Tzu addressed directly, because silence can also be used against you. And the next lesson reveals exactly how, and more importantly, how to protect yourself from someone who has already mastered this weapon. Lesson 3. Silence as deception. How to see through it. Sun Tzu wrote, "All warfare is based on deception, and silence, in the wrong hands, is one of the most perfect forms of deception ever created." This lesson cuts both ways, because while you're learning to use silence as a weapon, you must also learn to recognize when someone else is using it on you. Here is how it works. When someone who is normally talkative suddenly goes quiet, something has changed. When a competitor stops making noise in the market, they are not retreating, they are preparing. When a person who has been emotional suddenly becomes calm and distant, they have not made peace with the situation. They have made a decision. Sun Tzu wrote extensively about reading the signs that your enemy tries to hide. He observed that when an army suddenly becomes quieter, it is not because morale has dropped. It is because discipline has risen, and rising discipline means an attack is imminent. The same is true in human psychology. A person who goes silent after a conflict is not over it. They are processing, and processing for most people means building. Building resentment, building a plan, building distance. The silence you interpret as acceptance is often preparation. Sun Tzu warned his generals, "Never mistake the absence of noise for the absence of movement." In the ancient kingdom of Qi, there was a general named Tian Dan who was surrounded and vastly outnumbered. His enemy watched his camp and heard nothing. No movement, no drilling, no strategy. They relaxed. They assumed he had given up. And in the silence of the night, Tian Dan unleashed his famous fire ox formation. 1,000 oxen with blades tied to their horns and fire burning at their tails, directly into the enemy camp. He slaughtered an army that had not moved because they heard nothing. The silence was the strategy. So how do you see through someone's silence? Sun Tzu gave us the answer. He said, watch the body, not the mouth. Watch the movements, not the words. Watch what a person does with their time and their resources, not what they say or don't say. A silent enemy who is not moving is resting. A silent enemy who is still making small moves is preparing. The difference between those two things can determine everything. Application. The next time someone in your life goes unexpectedly quiet, do not assume resolution. Watch their behavior, watch their eyes, watch their patterns. The silence will tell you everything if you know how to listen to it. Wait until you hear what Sun Tzu said about listening itself, because the next lesson reveals that listening is not passive. In the hands of someone who has mastered it, listening is the most aggressive thing you can do. Lesson 4. The art of listening, the most aggressive act in any room. Sun Tzu wrote, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. Knowing your enemy. That phrase sounds simple, almost obvious. But here is what people miss entirely. You cannot know your enemy while you are talking. You can only know your enemy while you are listening. And Sun Tzu did not mean passive listening, the kind of listening where you nod politely and wait for your turn to speak. He meant strategic listening, complete, focused, predatory attention, where every word your opponent speaks is being cataloged, analyzed, and filed for future use. This is not a comfortable idea, because most of us were raised to think of listening as a generous act, as something you do for someone else, as politeness. Sun Tzu saw it as intelligence gathering. Think about what happens when you truly listen to someone, not to respond, but to understand their fears, their desires, their blind spots, their assumptions, their ego, their version of reality. Because every person, in the way they speak, in the words they choose, in what they emphasize and what they avoid, reveals their entire psychological map. And once you have that map, you know exactly where they are vulnerable, exactly what they want, exactly what they are afraid to lose. This is why the most dangerous people in any negotiation are the ones who ask questions and then go completely silent. Not to be polite, not because they have nothing to say, because they are learning, and learning in conflict is power. There is a documented psychological phenomenon called the vacuum of silence. When two people are in conversation and a silence appears, most people feel compelled to fill it. And in filling it, they say more than they intended. They explain themselves. They justify. They reveal. A master listener creates these vacuums deliberately. They ask one question, they wait, and they let the other person fill the space with everything they need to know. Sun Tzu did this with enemy territories. Before every campaign, he sent scouts, not to fight, not to intimidate, but to listen, to hear the conversations in the markets, to watch the faces of the soldiers, to feel the mood of the land. By the time Sun Tzu arrived at any battle, he already knew more about his enemy than his enemy knew about himself. That is the power of listening as aggression. Application. In your next difficult conversation, set yourself one rule. For every one thing you say, ask one question, and when they answer, do not respond immediately. Give it 3 full seconds of silence. In those 3 seconds, most people will keep talking, and in that extra talking, they will hand you everything you need. But here is what makes this truly dangerous, because silence combined with listening creates something that Sun Tzu considered his most powerful weapon of all. Something so subtle that most people never see it happening to them. We will get to that in the 6th lesson. But first, lesson 5. And this one is about timing, about the specific moment when silence becomes lethal. Lesson 5. The strategic pause. Timing. Silence like a weapon. Sun Tzu wrote, "He who knows when he can fight and when he cannot will be victorious. He who knows when, not who, not how, when." Sun Tzu was obsessed with timing. He understood that the same action taken at 2 different moments could produce completely opposite results. An army that attacks at dawn, when the enemy is groggy, disoriented, and cold, wins. The same army attacking at midday, when the enemy is alert, fed, and prepared, loses. This is exactly true for silence. Most people use silence randomly. They go quiet when they are hurt, when they are angry, when they don't know what to say. This is reactive silence, and it is the weakest form. Sun Tzu's silence was proactive, calculated, timed to the exact moment where it would have the greatest effect. Let us look at 3 specific moments where strategic silence is most powerful. The first, immediately after a challenge. When someone challenges you, attacks your idea, questions your competence, disrespects your position, the natural human reaction is to defend yourself immediately, to explain, to justify, to argue back. Sun Tzu would call this the enemy's trap, because the moment you react, you are playing on their timeline, not yours. You are emotional, not strategic, and emotional people make mistakes. The strategic pause, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds of complete silence, does something remarkable. It signals that their words did not destabilize you. It forces them to sit with what they said. It gives you time to choose your response instead of reacting, and it shifts the power of the room entirely in your direction. The person who pauses controls the pace. The person who controls the pace controls the conversation. The second, before a major decision. Sun Tzu never rushed. He was famous for taking longer than any other general to prepare, and then striking with absolute precision. His contemporaries sometimes mistook this for cowardice, for indecision, for weakness. It was none of those things. It was mastery of timing. In your own life, before you agree to anything significant, pause. Not because you don't know the answer, but because a decision made in silence after reflection is almost always better than a decision made in the heat of the moment. And the act of pausing, of not immediately saying yes, signals that your agreement is worth something, that your time is worth something, that you are not desperate. Desperate people answer immediately. Strategic people take their time. The third, in the moment of victory. This is the one that most people get completely wrong. When you win, whether in an argument, a negotiation, a competition, the instinct is to celebrate, to speak, to make sure everyone knows what happened. Sun Tzu said, "Be most careful in victory, because the moment you announce your victory, you give your opponent information. You show them exactly how you won. You allow them to study your methods. You hand them the blueprint of your strategy." The greatest strategists in history won quietly. They let their results speak. And while their opponents were trying to understand what had happened, they were already preparing the next move. Open loop. Speaking of next moves, the 6th lesson is where this all becomes truly dark, because Sun Tzu had a specific technique that combined silence, timing, and psychological pressure into something that can dismantle a person's confidence completely without a single confrontation. And it starts with something as simple as where you choose to stand. Lesson 6. Silence before the strike. Creating pressure without saying a word. Sun Tzu wrote, "In conflict, direct confrontation will lead to engagement, and surprise will lead to victory. The surprise is always more powerful than the engagement." By this point, we have established that silence protects your information, that it creates psychological pressure, that it allows you to gather intelligence while revealing nothing, that its timing can shift the balance of any encounter. Now we go one level deeper, because Sun Tzu did not just use silence as a response. He used it as a setup, a deliberate, premeditated construction of atmosphere, designed to make the other person doubt themselves before the confrontation even began. This is what military strategists call the psychological first strike. And it works like this. Before any important engagement, a negotiation, a difficult conversation, a confrontation, most people focus entirely on what they are going to say. They rehearse their arguments. They prepare their evidence. They plan their opening line. Sun Tzu would focus on something entirely different. He would focus on presence, on how he occupied space, on the atmosphere he created before a single word was spoken. Consider the effect of a general who arrives to a meeting and says nothing for an uncomfortable amount of time, who sits with complete stillness, who makes eye contact without blinking, who shows no anxiety, no impatience, no need to fill the space with words or movement. Before he has said anything, he has already communicated something enormous. He has communicated that he is not afraid, that he has done this before, that whatever you are about to say, he has already considered it. This is not performance. This is not intimidation for the sake of ego. This is strategic positioning, using your physical presence and your silence to shift the psychological dynamic of the room before the game even starts. Sun Tzu wrote about the importance of what he called shi, a Chinese concept that roughly translates to latent power or strategic advantage. The idea that power is not always in what you do, but in the potential of what you could do, like a drawn bow, like a coiled spring. Silence, stillness, and controlled presence. These are the physical expression of shi. And here is the most brutal part of this lesson. The person who walks into a room already talking, already defending, already explaining, has already surrendered their shi before anything has begun. They have shown their hand. They have revealed their anxiety. They have given their power away for free. The person who walks in silent, settled, and unhurried has made everyone else in the room wonder what they know. Application. Before your next high-stakes situation, whatever it is, practice this. Arrive slightly early. Settle into the space. Do not immediately check your phone. Do not fill the silence with small talk. Breathe. Be still. And when the other person speaks first, which they almost always will, listen to everything they say, because in trying to fill your silence, they will have already begun to lose. And now, the seventh lesson, the final one, the one I told you at the beginning that changes everything, because this lesson is not about tactics. It is not about specific situations. This is the principle that underlies every other lesson in this video. The reason why the most dangerous people, the ones who move through the world with quiet, unshakable authority, say the least, and command the most. Lesson 7. The silence that commands respect. Becoming someone who needs no words. Sun Tzu wrote, "The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, and then waited for an opportunity to defeat the enemy." First put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat. This is the final and most profound lesson about silence. Because everything we have discussed so far, the information control, the unspoken threat, the deception, the listening, the timing, the presence, all of it is a technique. But there is a level beyond technique. There are people in this world, you have met them, or at least felt them, who do not need any of these techniques, because their silence is not a strategy. It is an expression of who they have become. They do not stay quiet to manipulate. They stay quiet because they have nothing to prove. They do not listen strategically. They listen completely because they are genuinely more interested in understanding than in being understood. They do not create pressure with their silence. They create stillness. And in that stillness, other people feel both calmed and, on some level, deeply unsettled, because they cannot find the anxiety they were expecting. They cannot find the need for approval. They cannot find the desperation. Sun Tzu called this state of being formless. He wrote, "Therefore the victories of good warriors are not noted for cleverness or bravery. Therefore their victories in battle are not accidental. Their victories are not accidental because they position themselves where they will surely win, prevailing over those who have already lost. They prevail over those who have already lost." This is the deepest truth about silence. The person who has truly mastered it is not silent because they are hiding something. They are silent because they have done the work, because they know their own capabilities, because they have prepared deeply, rigorously, without announcement, and they simply wait. There is nothing more intimidating in this world than a person who is completely at peace with saying nothing, who does not need your validation, who does not need to explain themselves, who does not need to win the argument in the room, because they know the results will speak for themselves. This is not a personality trait. Sun Tzu would be very clear about this. This is the end result of a practice, of daily discipline, of choosing again and again not to speak before you have thought, not to react before you have observed, not to move before you are ready. The silence that commands respect, the kind that makes people lean in rather than look away, comes from a person who has built themselves into someone whose silence means something. Because when they do speak, they mean it. When they do move, it matters. When they do act, it is decisive, precise, and impossible to ignore. This is what Sun Tzu was pointing to with every lesson in the art of war. Not just tactics for the battlefield, but a way of being, forged in discipline, refined in patience, expressed through restraint. The most dangerous people do not announce themselves. The most powerful movements do not make noise. The most devastating strategies are the ones you never saw coming, because they were hidden perfectly, completely, in silence. We have covered 7 lessons today. Silence as information control, silence as an unspoken threat, silence as deception and how to see through it, listening as the most aggressive act in any room, the strategic pause and the power of timing, silence as psychological positioning before the first word is spoken, and finally, the deepest silence of all, the one that needs no strategy, the one that comes from becoming someone beyond the need for noise. These are not motivational ideas. These are not feel-good philosophies to put on your wall. These are weapons, and like all weapons, they require practice. So here is your challenge for this week. Choose one situation, one conversation, one meeting, one moment, where your instinct would normally be to speak first, explain yourself, or fill the silence. And instead, do nothing. Say nothing. Wait. Notice what happens. Notice what the other person reveals. Notice how the dynamic shifts. Notice how differently you feel when you choose silence over reaction. That moment, that small, deliberate act of restraint, is where it begins. Sun Tzu did not build his legacy on the battlefield. He built it in the moments before the battle, in the preparation, in the patience, in the silence. You have that same capacity. The only question is whether you choose to develop it. If this video made you think differently about silence, about power, about the invisible weapons that shape every encounter you will ever have, then subscribe to this channel, because we are just getting started. Every video we release goes deeper into the strategies that history's greatest minds used not just to survive, but to dominate, without apology, without weakness, without noise. The next video goes even further into the darkness because Sun Tzu had another weapon, one that he considered even more powerful than silence. And it is the one that your enemies are already using against you. Watch it next.